Hello, everyone. Hi, Ollie.
Hi, Marcos. Hi, everybody.
Fantastic. All right. So this week we're back to our little exploration of the signs and looking at signs of the zodiac and herbs or medicinal plants, plant medicines that belong to each of the signs in our view. And we may be a little bit contentious this week, a little bit debate prone because neither of us are entirely sure of our picks this week, to be fair, but but we'll make the best of it. So we're talking about Gemini this week. So I will, as usual, read the little description of Gemini from Abu Mashar's introduction, the abbreviation of the Introduction to Astrology, from sort of 11th century or so. He says Gemini is the house of Mercury and the exaltation of the head of the dragon in its third degree. It has three decans. The first decan belongs to Jupiter, the second to Mars, the third to the Sun. Its nature is hot and moist, airy, sanguine, that means associated with blood. Its taste is sweet and it is masculine. It is a masculine sign, diurnal, bicorporeal, two-bodied, belonging to spring, and in its last part, the daylight becomes longest. Many-faced, flying, to it belong tall trees, in human form, eloquent, barren, powerful in voice, youthful, beautiful in face, generous, good in its soul. To it belong the body of man, to it belong of the body of man, beg pardon, the shoulders, the upper arms, and the hands. And he mentions some countries he thinks it rules, but they're all in the Middle East because of the provenance of the book. So we'll leave that. Any surprises there, Ollie?
Um, uh, any surprises? Nothing really jumped out at me as like, oh, bloody hell, I didn't know that.
Okay.
So no, but yeah, well, fascinating. Oh, tall trees is always interesting. Well, I don't know where they get these plant.
Yeah, that's
Might
interesting,
give.
isn't it? It helps with the plant assignations, and of course, because it's sanguine, a lot of that associated with the sweet taste that might help with plant associations. But yeah, you're quite
Yeah,
right.
yeah. No, I mean some of the associations do gel with the stuff I've got. Others, it's like, no, that's not a tall tree. That's unfortunate. But there we go.
Yeah, I think one of mine is a not really that tall tree, and the other one is not. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. That for me, the things that, in terms of, there's no surprises really in terms of the medical stuff there. I mean, other things that could be thought about in terms of the perhaps medical associations, apart from the sweet taste, tall trees, if we're assigning plants to it potentially, um, are the anything that associate with the upper arms and hands, the blood, um, but also what else? Barren. That's interesting. It's one of the
Yeah,
signs which is barren. So it could be that some plants which have an anti-fertility action
yes,
could belong to
yes, yes,
Gemini. That's an
yes, yeah. Interesting.
interesting
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
And one that we haven't selected. I'm thinking on the fly here. Maybe cotton, Gossypium, might be an interesting thing to think about Gemini because cotton is used for so many
Right.
things of
Yes. Yes.
civilization, garments, yada yada, and it's anti-fertility. So that anyway, that's not that either of us have selected Gossypium, but that's a potential. And then the only other thing that struck me, total tangent, which we won't get into in detail this week, but the bit about it being youthful, beautiful in face, generous, and good in its soul. I love that. And I actually checked what other signs are described as beautiful in face, generous, and good in
Yeah.
soul. And there's only one other that's described with all three, and that's the Virgo. Virgo, the other Mercury ruled sign, is described as beautiful in face, generous, good in its soul. And this might apply if you had, say, Virgo or Gemini rising together with some benefic on an angle,
Right.
and there wasn't
Yes.
a malefic
Yes.
sitting anywhere beating up your chart, yada yada. But it's an interesting one. And then the other two signs which were said to be um, generous of soul and beautiful in face were Libra and Scorpio. Interestingly,
Scorpio's an
but
interesting one. Libra, yes, but I wouldn't have thought Scorpio.
yeah, but it's interesting. Here's where it gets interesting. So this is the interesting tangent. Of those, only the two Mercury ruled signs were described as beautiful in face, generous, and good in their soul.
Ah,
Libra is described as beautiful in face and
yeah.
generous of soul, but
Uh-huh.
not good in its soul. And Scorpio is described as beautiful in face, generous of soul, but also prone to anger, lying, and corrupt. So Scorpio is the most ambivalent of them. You know,
Definitely,
it's
yeah.
sort of like which one might expect, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of it could be. It's I think Scorpio is the sign that's most prone to extremes of goodness and badness, one might
Yeah.
say.
Yes.
So, but really interesting. And then, and the other thing that's interesting is you see so many pop astrologers, which I was just moaning about before we went live this evening. Um, Talking about just I've seen a lot of this about don't like the worst signs to date, Gemini and Scorpio, and I'm just like, where do you get this nonsense? I mean, it's utter nonsense, but also particularly apart from the fact that that kind of sun sign pigeonholing, I mean, it might be fun, but it's not really
Yeah.
accurate.
Yeah. No, no.
It's also just the idea that Geminis are somehow naughty and bad. Well, actually, traditionally, as we've just heard, the sign is supposed to be. If Geminis are naughty, I sort of see it like the innocence of a toddler putting toast into a DVD player just to
Yeah.
see what might
Yeah.
happen.
See what
Do you know what I
happens.
mean?
Yeah.
Like, see what
Yeah. Yeah.
happens. Yeah, see what happens. But it's which can be quite destructive and costly, but isn't malicious. You know, there's a certain playfulness with
Yeah.
Gemini. Anyway, we digress. Do you want to kick off with a herb, Ollie?
Yes. So I had real trouble with this one.
Hmm.
I think we ought to mention that nowadays that we assign a few more medical bits to Gemini signs. That it also rules the top of the lungs. Well, with Cancer ruling the bottom of the lungs, the nervous system to a certain extent. And anything else I've missed there, Marcos?
No, not tops of the lungs, nervous system, blood circulation. I'd
Blood.
maybe add potentially capillaries and bronchioles and
Yes.
little pathways. So
Yes.
may even rule things like neural pathways as
Okay, and that
well.
would tie in with the whole neurological
Yeah,
aspect of the
yeah,
nerve and that.
yeah.
So okay, so with that done, there aren't obviously very many herbs that say these are really good for your arms and hands and shoulders, sort of thing.
What?
Which would be great. Wish I had some. But anyway, so my first herb is lavender, which could be a controversial choice. Now, it's a herb of Mercury, which is obviously one of the rulers of the ruler of Gemini. So that obviously helps. Um, but when if we read Culpeper, he immediately assigns it to head and brain.
Mm,
But then a lot of the stuff he says to them are sort of really sort of neural conditions like fainting and sluggish maladies and apoplexy. So I don't think it's quite. So I think rather than say, oh, it's Aries, I think well, really we could say there's a more nowadays we'd see those as more as general sort of nervous disorders.
mm.
And things I did like in its favor are, well, from Culpeper, which I hadn't realized, is 2 spoonfuls of distilled water of the flowers taken helps them that have lost their voice, as also the
Mm.
tremblings and passions of the heart, blah, 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 blah.
Nice. And yeah, it's a Gemini loud voiced
Loud
sign.
voice. So it's got that in its favor. Also, there's my notes. It's as I said, it's easy stress, anxiety. It's good for insomnia, which are all nervous conditions, which you could well put to a Gemini. It's also very good for Raynaud's as a and helps with those vasospasms that Raynaud's. So that's often in the hand. So that's a direct hand bit for
Mm.
lavender, which I
I've
quite
not
like.
heard of it used for Raynos. Is it
Yeah,
quite
yeah, it's I can't remember which book I found it in now. I could find you later, but yeah.
that's fascinating. It's not a herb I would have considered for Raynos at all. So
Well,
so
apparently
that's
it's not so much the capillary base, which is my next herb. It's to do
mm.
with the nervous base and stress causing everything the circulation
Okay.
to
I
stress
can
up,
see that. I
and
can see
so
that.
it relaxes the hands. Therefore, as just as a cold tends to make the circulation the capillaries tighter. So
Yeah.
and it also promotes peripheral blood flow, as I said, blah blah blah, and circulation to extremities. What else I've got here? It's general anti-inflammatory. Now, there's a good one, another Culpeper note here, and this is from it being a barren sign, yeah?
Mm,
Culpeper has it as provokes woman's courses and expels the dead child and afterbirth, which
okay.
sounds fairly barren to me. So, and of course, that is code to him as it could be used as an abortifant as well.
Autofacient. Okay.
Abortifacient, sorry,
Yeah, yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
that's pretty barren too. So it's antenatal sort of thing. Oh, you say beautify. It's used in a lot of beauty treatments as well. And I thought
That's true.
that
That's
whole
true.
hair of face thing. I mean, you know, the amount of lavender soaps and skin health care shampoos, blah blah blah, you get of
People used to
lavender.
like wear lavender soaked handkerchiefs, and that's an interesting thing.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I think again, so that kind of seems it's quite a good match.
I love that. And I've just thought the name lavender literally comes from the Latin lavare, meaning to
Yes, yes, it
wash. It was
does.
used
Yes,
to
it does.
wash the
So yeah.
hands.
So yeah, there we have it. That's my that's my lavender pitch for
I love
Gemini.
it. I love it. I actually think that's pretty good because I've always, I mean, lavender is pretty clearly a mercurial herb in the tradition.
Yes.
And I thought maybe it's Virgo, but not really. And I'm actually much more caught by your Gemini attribution. I have a couple of things just thinking as you were speaking there, Ollie, which we could add to that. The first is that lavender is, of course, most popular and known as an essential oil, which is a
Yes.
volatile oil. Now, volatile oils could be fire or air. They're not
Yeah.
going to be water or earth.
No.
Fire, because volatile oils in herbal alchemy are that if I, you know, essential oils are fiery products, but obviously they're inhaled. They're breathed in.
Brilliant. Yes. Yes. So
So
yeah.
air. And the
Yeah.
second thing is lavender, the smell of lavender is commonly described in textbooks as sweet smelling. It's a
Yes.
sweet
Yes. Sweet.
smelling herb.
Certainly
Well,
is. Yes.
this is a herb of Mercury, so it makes sense to put it in an air sign for all of those reasons. And the third reason I have, and this is maybe one reason why I was thinking of it for Virgo, because Virgo ruling the intestines and it's good
Yeah.
carminative and
Yeah. Of
yada
course.
yada. But also Mercury in the Virgo rules the head because in Saunders' system it's the first. But same
Yeah.
applies to
Yeah.
Gemini. Same applies to Gemini.
Oh God,
Mercury.
it does. Yes. Of course it does.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So
So I mean, a lot. So you know, I think I'm leaning, particularly on the basis of what you pointed out, the sort of lavender associated with the association with cleaning and with washing the hands and face and with the sweet the volatile nature of it, the sweet smelling nature of it, plus as you mentioned, you know, the treatment for nervous conditions, all of that's really interesting, and sort of skews towards Gemini. Very, very interesting thing about the voice as well. So
yes.
and the, as you say, the abortifacient thing, which is appropriate for a barren sign herb.
Yes.
Yeah, really loving that, and a very dignified Mercury, which one might expect for a herb held in
Absolutely.
such
Absolutely.
esteem.
Yes.
um and yet something with the, I mean, I'm still, I could still make an argument, I think, for Mercury in Virgo,
I'm sure you could, Marcos, but yeah.
but it has to go either way, and I think I'm leaning more towards your Gemini pick there, Ollie.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Good. That's chalk that up
Well,
as a
not that
win.
I am the final arbiter of these things, but you know, whatever. All right, so I'll move on to my first pick, which I'm slightly more confident of. And this is a somewhat obscure herb, sadly, these days, but it's a plant that I haven't actually used. I see it growing all the time. It throws itself at me and I've kept ignoring it. And I really just need to pick it and make use of it. And this isn't a particularly wonderful picture, but it's the favorite picture I could find. This is a Cicimbrium officinale, or hedge mustard. And you'll note that its Latin name is officinale. Its generic name, genus name, is officinale, which means that officinalis is a genus, means it was once official. It was once in the pharmacopoeia. It was a standard medicine. So Culpeper says, I'll read you what Culpeper says. He says it's a herb of Mars. So he says Mars owns this herb. It's singularly good in all diseases of the chest and lungs, hoarseness of voice, and by the use of the decoction thereof for a little space, those have been recovered who had utterly lost their voice and almost their spirits also. The juice made into a syrup or licking medicine with honey or sugar is no less effectual for the same purpose and for all other coughs, wheezing, and shortness of breath. It's also profitable for those that have jaundice, pleurisy, pains in the back and loins, and for torments in the belly or colic, being also used in clysters. That means sort of pessaries, I think, or suppositories in this case, sort of enema. Um, the seed is held to be special remedy against poison and venom. It's singularly good for the sciatica, which is an interesting one, not one that we think of really for this. And in joint aches, ulcers, and cankers in the mouth, throat, behind the ears, and no less for the hardness and swelling of the testicles or of women's breasts. So a really interesting one.
Yes.
Um, and we'll talk a bit about the chemistry and stuff in a sec, but so why do I think this is Mars in Gemini? Well,
Yeah.
firstly, the morphology of the plant. It's Mars because it's spicy. It's in the mustard family. It has all these nice little glucosinolates in it, which are sort of common to cress and mustard and whatever, and many of the brassicas actually, but make it taste a bit spicy and fiery. So you can see why the Mars attribution. But if you see it growing, I sometimes call it the candelabra plant because it just branches out. It shoots out so many little branches, and the seeds are long sort of pods that lie along the branches that you can sort of see in this little picture here with the tiny little flowers at the tips of the branches. So it looks like little burning. The flowers are like little flames at the ends of the branches, and it just has all these little branches that shoot out of it. So to me, the appearance is sort of like this multi-branched thing. Reminds me of Gemini or Virgo because I always think the sort of mercurial signature is one of poly or plurality. Many different bits sticking out. But that's just my reading of it, of its physicality. Perhaps more convincingly, potentially, would be the traditional use of it. It's also known as singer's plant, and it was used particularly as culpeper talk for people who lose their voice, and it's still used by some singers before they perform because it's thought to
Wow.
strengthen the voice. And there are only three loud voiced signs in the zodiac, and those are Gemini, Virgo, and Libra. And out of all of those, I would plonk this squarely into Gemini because it has its main medicinal use, apart from strengthening the voice, is also for sort of lung stuff. Now, if the bulk of the lungs belong to Cancer, they do, but Gemini, as we said, rules maybe the tops of the lungs. And Mercury, the planet, rules the pathology of catarrh, interestingly enough. You might think that catarrh would be ruled by Venus or the moon being phlegmy, but
I
Mercury
never
rules
knew that. Right.
snuffles and catarrh, yeah, as well as neurological problems. So that's kind of interesting. But so it's used to disperse, but certainly to open up the pipes of the lungs or whatever Culpeper said there. And the other use of it, one of the other uses of it is for colic. And I think that's interesting because if we put Mars in Gemini, that puts using Saunders's system, that would mean it would be the third sign from Aries, which is Gemini. So that would
Right.
be arms,
Yep.
shoulders, and
Yep.
hands, but it
Yep.
doesn't really have any notable uses for those. But it would also put it in the eighth sign from Scorpio, Gemini being the eighth sign, Scorpio, which is the bowel or the womb. And Culpeper talked there about it being really useful in clysters or enemas,
Right. Right.
and
Yes.
and also for colic. So that those are sort of Scorpio-y sort of indications. Um, so yeah, and then just in terms of the pharmacology of it, of anything else, it just says this is really old now. This is a 20-year-old book, but it's Potter's Herbal Cyclopedia, and talks about it containing these mustardy compounds and really interestingly some cardioactive glycosides, although those are apparently found in tiny, tiny, tiny amounts. So it doesn't have a strong or notable effect on the heart. And formerly used for hoarseness, weak lungs, and to help the voice. So that's about it. And then I found another trial showing that it relaxes the smooth muscles of the throat. They've done a little bit of experimentation on it. So yeah, so that was my first pick. I have to say, one of the real reasons I put this as Mars in Gemini is really just a sort of intuition, which is very vague and wouldn't pass muster on an exam or anything. But I think when I look at this plan, I just think it's Gemini. It's the sort of the fact that it's multi-branched and whatever. But I may well be wrong. But I think Mars in Gemini for all that. Any thoughts on that, Ollie?
No, it's not a herb I'd ever come across. So I mean, it's absolutely fascinating
Hey.
to hear about it. How do you tincture it up then for your
I
paint?
have not used it ever. I've seen it for
Oh, right.
years and years and years. I've got samples of it in my herbarium. It like I notice it on herb walks. It's one of those plants that throws itself at me. In other words, which my psyche
Interesting.
notices and latches onto. So or which I have a little conversation with that plant whenever I go on a herb walk. I'm like, oh, here you are. So it's just a regular ragamuffin in my path
Well,
that I've
the
never
thing,
really used because, I haven't got round to it, but I'm trying as time goes on to lean my dispensary more and more and more towards traditional
yes,
European plants.
yes,
And I'm
yeah.
slowly trying to, not very hard, but I'm gradually phasing out my use of non-European, non-local herbs.
Right,
Not,
yes.
not in, not that I'm aspiring to become a member of UKIP or anything. It's just like I rather sort of build up my traditional dispensary,
I agree. I mean, my only, I've got quite a big garden, so if I can get an exotic herb, shall we say, to grow in my, and it seems to like growing in my garden, I think, oh, okay, that's a naturalized
Yes.
herb now. So I'm happy to use that because I do like to see them growing. When even if I'm buying tinctures from the tincture vendors, it's always
Yeah.
nice to have to see them, in the wild to kind of get a feel for them and get to know the herb.
Yeah, I agree. That's lovely, Ollie. I agree. Well, I mean, two things. I'm quite a lazy gardener and I have a tiny garden. So those are two impediments. The first, honestly, being probably the more problematic of the two. But there's two impediments for me to thoroughly doing that. But yeah, I love that. I love that notion. And I still do obviously use a lot of non-European plants in my
Yeah.
practice because I'm familiar with them. We were trained with them. I've used them for 20
This
years
is the
plus.
thing. I mean, I'm glad to say things like Eleutherococcus, Centicoccus that grow like bilio in my garden. I've got like eight.
Oh, really? That's
Oh,
interesting.
yeah. So
I'd like to try growing rhodiola actually, because it is it
got some
is
of that as well.
indigenous.
It's very pretty as well. You need a little rockery for it. It needs very sandy soil, but then it
Okay.
loves it.
I think I'd like to grow that alongside Jupiter ruled herb, house leek,
Yeah,
sempervivum.
I've got some
Yes.
in your little rocker. I've got in the same rocker. I've got some house
Perfect.
leek
Perfect. Perfect. Oh my goodness. All right. Anyway, right.
pasque flowers, which are doing very well now as
Oh,
well.
I definitely want to grow. Those are beautiful. But we could wax lyrical about
Yeah,
various
sorry, yeah,
granules.
another
I suspect
time,
we may
another
be losing
time.
our audience, but
I'm going to be very quick on the next one because I'm
okay.
totally unconvinced by it. So,
All right. Okay. Yes. Shall I? You start talking. I'll bring it up.
I'll start. So I was really stretching for this one, and I thought so it's a herb I really like using as well. So I thought we'll give it a comment. We'll give it a shout out anyway.
Yeah.
And it's bilberry, which is of course Vaccinium myrtlis, and it's I hope it'll be familiar to any herbalists listening here, and I use it a lot for circulatory issues, which is
Mm.
why it was one of the herbs I thought, maybe this would be nice in Gemini because of that association with the capillary vessels. And again, you can use it for Raynaud's and stuff like that. Um, of varicose veins, any venous return issues, so it's probably more of a Pisces direction in that, in the legs and feet sort of thing, or even Aquarius, of course.
Mm.
So here I am undermining my arguments as I speak. And obviously the general circulation, which is we've already mentioned, is the Gemini thing.
Yeah.
It's quite a kind of Gemini herb, though. It's quite sort of little bitty and it's low on the ground. I mean, and we know it's meant to be big trees, so it's kind of the opposite of a tall tree. Um, but yeah, so a shout out for Bilberry. I'm not sure where would you put it, Marcos?
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely spot on with in one way, but I think this herb, Culpeper signs it, he says it's a Jupiter herb, which I always thought was interesting. And I
Yeah,
think that's on the basis that it's super benign and food grade and gentle and good for
yeah,
just about
definitely,
anyone,
yeah.
which you'd expect of the great benefic Jupiter, right? But he says it's Jupiter. I would put it as Jupiter in Virgo.
Oh,
So I think
interesting.
you're on point with the Mercury rulership, but I'm pretty sure it's Virgo. And the reason being, Culpeper talks about the wild bilberries, which of course are related to blueberries, but
Yes.
blueberries I think are Vaccinium macrocarpon, they're big berries. I think
Hmm.
they're macrocarpon, whereas bilberries are myrtillus, as you mentioned. So
Yes.
much smaller berries, much higher content of the anthocyanins, those
Yes.
purple antioxidant compounds. But I would put it as Jupiter and Virgo because Culpeper mentions it as being good for diarrhea and for
Okay.
intestinal issues. And of course, that's
Yes, it
the
does.
dry
Yes.
bilberry sort of drying up things in a very benign, gentle way, sort of shunting the microbiome back to normal.
Yes.
But I totally agree with the mercurial rulership of the little blood vessels and things like that. And that does sound more Gemini because blood, right? But
Right. Yeah.
it's a low shrubby thing that has that cooling and binding action on the
Yeah,
guts.
and very near to the ground. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, so
And it's
I
also
and also it
mercurial.
lowers
So,
blood sugar. It's the leaves are
oh,
used as a
yes.
hypoglycemic,
Yes.
and that to me seems a very Virgo action because of the fall of Venus in Virgo.
Oh, I like that. Yes, I do.
You
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
but I think you were absolutely on track with the Mercury thing. I think an argument for Gemini could be made on the basis that it's definitely, if it's a Jupiter herb, it's definitely in one of Mercury's signs because, as you say, it's the so many tiny little fruits and little leaves and the
Yeah.
branching out of it, and the fact that it is so good. That was all the research shows for
Yeah.
peripheral circulation and microcirculation in the eyes and elsewhere. But yeah, I would argue for Virgo, but.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So we'll move swiftly on, Marcos, to your
All
second
right. To
card.
my final pick, which I am also less confident of, but interestingly, we're sort of on a theme, because if I can pull it up, I have chosen Ginkgo biloba, which is sometimes called the maidenhair tree. And while it's been used for thousands of years in Chinese medicine, the Chinese mainly used in traditional Chinese medicine, they used the seeds. And they use those, I think, for lung conditions, for asthma and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yes.
But the leaves, the use of the leaves was only really developed in the 1970s after scientific research. And these are mainly used for, in a sense, quite similar indications to bilberry for like peripheral circulation, and sort of strengthening capillaries. But ginkgo has an interesting additional property in that it antagonizes PAF or platelet aggregation factor, so it helps reduce blood clotting, and it also improves and enhances the memory in research. In fact, I've got a little. I think this is a very ancient and battered and very well loved herbal compendium by Kerry Bone here, desk reference, which just gives the short Cliff Notes version. So it says ginkgo biloba, leaf 20 to 40 ml of a 2-in-1 liquid extract. In other words, very concentrated extracts normally used with this. Main actions: antioxidant, antiplatelet, tissue perfusion enhancing, circulatory stimulant, cognition enhancing, neuroprotective, protects nerve cells, and key indications: potentially helpful as an adjuvant in Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia, prevention and treatment, impaired peripheral circulation, gangrene, Raynaud's syndrome, dizziness of vascular origin, macular degeneration, impaired retinal blood flow, asthma, and to promote healing. And then also other indications, slightly controversial: tinnitus, idiopathic hearing loss, stroke of recent onset, congestive dysmenorrhea, and altitude sickness. A bit controversial with the altitude sickness as well. And then caution for people taking anticoagulants. So astrologically, I think this is a herb of Saturn, or Mercury, not entirely sure, but Saturn arguably, because it's an old, it is a tree, not super tall, but an old tree. It's a very long lived.
Marcos, go to Kew Gardens
Yeah.
and see the ginkgo tree there. It's enormous. It's 250 years old or
Oh,
something.
is it? Oh, it's absolutely massive.
Because like they didn't bring any. I mean, so all the ginkgos, I think it grows very slowly, and all the ginkgos
Because
there.
I've only seen it in streets and
Yeah,
in
and the
little.
one in Kew Gardens is vast.
Right. Okay. Oh, thank you for that, Ollie. So that may be a point in favor for its
Indeed,
Gemini
definitely. Yes,
attribution then.
yeah,
Because I mean, I thought Saturn, because it grows to a very great age,
yes,
and
and it's
it's
very
some of
stable.
its indications as well, like memory. We think memory is traditionally ruled by Saturn. The fact that it affects blood clotting, it's an anticoagulant, but Saturn is coagulation.
And it's a prehistoric tree from the dawn of time. It's
Ancient,
very Saturn.
ancient. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good one. Thank you, Ollie. Yes, I'd forgotten that. So it's very, very. And I'm struck, as I say, this is the first tree that budded and came back to life after Hiroshima was bombed,
Wow.
which is extremely sad and very poignant, But it was the first thing to come back to life. It's extremely resilient. Um, so interesting tree. And then in the Gemini rulership, I think it's the traditional use for asthma and that sort of spasmodic lung
Hmm.
condition.
Hmm.
It's the use for the neuroprotective thing, the action on the nervous system there. And of course, the fact that it helps the little capillaries and it's used as a circulatory agent. So I think that's three very positive medical signatures for its position in Gemini: the action on the blood, the action on the microcirculation, the action on the memory. I'd assign all of those, not memory so much, but more the neuroprotective actually sort of thing could be arguably Gemini. Um, and then yeah, the tall tree aspect of it's not sweet, but then Saturn isn't. Um, so, but it does affect the blood. It doesn't really have any action on the voice or on fertility.
I don't know because I've always sort of, and I've never really thought about this, but always thought maybe it's in Aquarius. But
Yeah,
again,
my alternative rulership for this would be something like Mercury in Aquarius. That was one
right.
of my. I thought ginkgo might be a
Sort of
mercurial
invert
herb.
yeah, the Gemini becomes Mercury and Saturn becomes Aquarius. Yes,
Yes,
that
they would have they would have we would have to invert the main rulership, which is the planet, because
yeah,
one really should assign the planet first,
definitely
and the
yes.
sign is the cherry on top.
But
'Cause-
Mercury and Aquarius would work quite nicely as well, wouldn't it? So it's interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, we could go on and on. So
I'd have to really think about this one because I could see it as being a primary tree of Saturn on the basis of the factors that we talked about, but it also could be a primarily mercurial tree in a Saturn ruled sign. So
yeah,
if what would make it more
yeah.
mercurial might be the action on the nervous system, if it has various forms of it, but I'm perhaps more inclined to it being a slightly more benign Saturn tree, but it isn't super toxic, which one might expect of a Saturn tree, or super
Yeah, that's true.
problematic.
It's interesting, though the fruit is extremely stinky, which is quite Saturn.
Yes, that's true, and it does have a lot of ginkgolic acid in it, which is
Yes.
is toxic. So it does produce a notable, not super powerful, but a plant
Mm.
toxin, which is why I often recommend as a herbalist if I'm giving people ginkgo that they actually this is one of the very few herbs where I'm like, yeah, if you're going to buy it, buy either a tincture produced by a careful manufacturer like Mediherb in Australia, where you have to sell your kidneys to afford them because they're so expensive, but they're very good, or buy a standardized extract because you don't want to get an extract with a high level of ginkgolic acid
No,
in because it's really
no.
bad, I think, for the kidneys.
And
Um,
I mean, a standardized extract might be better. And most of the research, I was listening to an interesting podcast on this the other day for ginkgo, if not all, comes from very powerful standardized extracts. So
huh.
very little research done on standard strength tinctures. So
Yes.
they're
Yes,
all like
exactly.
3,000 to one extract sort of thing.
Now that totally makes sense because the most of the uses of this herb that we use it for in quote unquote Western herbal medicine are derived from that 1970s
That's
clinical
right.
research on the
Yes.
standardized extracts. Exactly. So yeah, but anyway, that's food for thought.
Excellent.
Um, yeah, thanks, Ollie. I
Well,
mean,
I
I
think
hope.
that turned out to be extremely interesting. I've learned something. Thank you, Marcos. That's
Yeah, no,
really
well, likewise. Thank you. I always enjoy these conversations. So hopefully you, dear viewers, dear viewer, well, enjoy it as well. And I'd ask if you've enjoyed it, please like this, please share it, please do leave us a comment if you want us to talk about something, or you're interested in us addressing something, or just you have any thoughts about these herbs. Not only because it helps us think through them, but also it helps direct a little bit more attention to our little channel, which is helping the channel grow, and that's always appreciated. So
definitely.
anyway,
All
all
right.
right,
Cheerio then.
fantastic. Thanks, Ollie. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Marcos.